This video is going to be a little bit lengthy, but it is a Turbo 400 rebuild with a reverse manual valve body and engine brake for the new rock buggy project. I was specifically looking for this Turbo 400. The reason I was looking for it was this piece right here. This dust cover bolts to these mounting points on the truck bell housing. What that does is, first of all, it keeps any kind of flex from happening, or as much. And then, you can see these bolt holes on the bottom of it. They ran strut rods up to the engine block underneath the engine mounts. What that did was it created a triangle. Triangles are strong. It took a lot of the load off of the upper bell housing bolts. So that part increased the strength of these 4x4 truck transmissions a lot. Now, there were rumors that the K transmission cases, which is what this is, were thicker. If they are, I sure can't tell you because it doesn't feel any thicker to me than every other car transmission out there. Now, purchasing a used Turbo 400, my recommendation, don't pay more than the core is worth. Because even if they tell you it works, it may or may not work. I already had this pan off once, so there's not too terribly much fluid. Well, this is typical on how the snowball effect works. I started off with a Turbo 400 I was specifically looking for that was made for four-wheel drive. I've got the lower plate, etc. There's nothing wrong with the transmission. Then I decided I want the reverse gear pattern. And to explain that real quick, normal pattern on a transmission is park, reverse, neutral, drive, 2, 1 on a Turbo 400. Well, rock crawling and you get yourself into a predicament, it's really nice to be able to be in first gear, go right through neutral and hit reverse. And when you use a gated shifter, you can slam them, you can get yourself out of trouble pretty quick and easy. So I did decide on this buggy build, I want a reverse gear pattern. Threw that on the internet and found a valve body, etc. that accommodated that. Well, when you go into the reverse gear pattern, and then they threw in something else I really liked, and that was an engine brake. Letting off the gas on an automatic, and they like to kind of coast. When you get one with an engine brake, it holds it, so that even was more appealing to me. So that's the kit I got from TCI. I don't know much about the kit other than TCI builds it. They're pretty reputable in the transmission world, so I figured, what the heck. Got the kit, looked at the instructions, and figured out I have to disassemble this transmission clear down to the center support, which means you're pulling the second, third gear, clutches, everything out, clear back to your actual gear drive back here. At that point, you may as well rebuild the transmission. So the $500 transmission snowballed into an $800 transmission, snowballed into a $1,200 transmission, and I guess I get to do a video on rebuilding a transmission with a trans brake, or not a trans brake, an engine brake, and reverse gear pattern, manual. First thing, this one doesn't have a speedometer, it's four-wheel drive, so it's just got a plug there, so you don't have to worry about taking out the speedometer. Governor just slides right out. If you're going to reuse these, make sure you check your springs. There's different color springs, different loads. Make sure you check the pins. Based on the instructions for the TCI kit, I will not be reinstalling that. Modulator. I already pulled the O-ring out. Vacuum modulator, again, this will not be used in this particular application. I already pulled the filter. Someone has been in here at least doing a filter. They double O-ringed it, which is something I do prefer. Next step, we're going to take the valve body off. disconnect the kick down. On turbo 400s, the valve body bolts, the 5/16 are all the same length, so you don't have to worry about that. This little valve comes out with the modulator, and just an FYI, you will be reusing this. It's slid out nice and easy. If there's anything, burrs or anything sticking, you will have to address that later. Most of the stuff in the valve body, I just set in the transmission pan until I figure out what I'm going to need to go back in. And the detent spring for the shifter will also come out of place. So now we got 3 7/16 head bolts. Now, if you saw this jump, a lot of times they will jump up just from the spring pressure in your servo. The governor tubes, they just push out. And we're off. I am keeping the manual shift valve. I believe I have to swap that over. Currently, if this servo is raised, then the plunger is flat. If the plunger is raised, this side is flat. So we will not be reusing this either. It's slippery, but I will set it aside for now. Okay, I've got one clean gasket there. I have to take the solenoid off for the kick down before the inner plate will come off. And I believe this does not go back in with the new valve body either. The hole or something. So this gasket came off clean as well. Now, I like the transmission up like it is because there are a bunch of check balls in here, and this one may have 7. I don't know if this is a late enough model. 5, so yeah. Another thing, back here in the governor, there is a screen filter. If you're putting your original valve body back in with the governor, you will have to put that back in, but this won't go back in. This is now kind of a dead spot in the transmission. That's also a good place to drill a hole in the pan for my drain plug. There's a spring right here, and a lot of guys will hold this back with a rubber band while they're rebuilding. At this point, I don't think I really need to do anything with that. Taking the detent and the shaft apart, I really am not going to need to do that. There is a nail, a literal finishing nail that the factory puts in these. And while I'm here, I am going to bend that just so it doesn't come out while I'm moving this around. But the only reason to really take this out is to be able to knock the shift shaft seal out. That's one of the few specialty tools I have is a shift shaft seal tool. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. All right, I'm gonna bring the old camera around here. So, something I like to do, you can see if it's your first time in a transmission, you can mark where the check balls go with little zip ties. Just take a picture of it before you take them out, then you know where they're going. To get the check balls out, little magnet. And this has 6. Put those in one of my magnetic trays, just in case. Now, right here is the center support bolt. I'll be taking that out in a little while. Next up, we'll take the reverse band servo out. There we go. Get the seal straight and it'll release just fine. I believe these seals in the reverse servo we will not be reinstalling. Now we'll get the pump out. I'm really not sure why they call this a front pump. It's in the front, yes, but it's the only pump in the transmission. Just wanted to bring this in closer. When you're removing the pump, you can just put a little pry bar screwdriver right in here. Pump comes right out. Pry bar screwdriver in. And of course, you are going to leak more fluid, so thinking all the time here. All right, pump came out really nice. The gasket came out with it. We will be replacing the spring. All right, this has been dribbling long enough, so next out, forward drum. Then the direct drum and clutches. Sprag's working just fine. And we'll take a look at the clutches in here. Ooh, broken pressure plate. Well, initially, I was kind of bummed I had to take this thing apart because it was a working transmission. But it wasn't going to work for very long. This is out of the direct drive clutches, the pressure plate, and it is broken in many pieces. And then the intermediate band. Band looks in pretty good shape too. It's not blued, not discolored. All right, specialty tool. Screwdriver with a notch in it. It makes it really easy to reach in, grab, and lift the snap rings in here so that they come right out. This snap ring is just your normal flat one. The next snap ring is a bevel. Then your intermediate or second gear clutches come out. Intermediate clutches. Let's take a look-see. I don't know. No lines on them, but they aren't in bad shape. Sometimes you have to grind this socket down. Put this snap-on 1/4 inch. Perfect. This is the only bolt like this in the unit, so you won't mix it up with anything else. Now this one has a bevel in it, so make sure you don't flip that upside down or backwards when you go back the other way. Now, this assembly comes right out. Okay, the only thing I've got left, it should be, is a band and a thrust washer. This particular transmission does have the thin snap ring behind here. Some of them do, some of them don't. And then our reverse band. Now these are normally black, so I was taught, scrape it. If you get a little bit of sludge, you're okay. If you get in piles, you've definitely got a bad band, but this one's usable. Last piece is our rear thrust washer. I put a 5-gallon bucket inside this trash can. It's just a 20-gallon trash barrel, and that'll give me a place to set this case while I'm working on other stuff. Kind of holds them just perfect. So now I can clean this up, and I can use my bitch to work on all the assembly. So the only reason to pull the shaft out is to get to the seal. Usually I can pull them out with my little external puller. This one's a little tight, so I don't know. I may still end up having to pull it out. And there's the shift joint. So I take a lot of time and I clean all these little cavities out. I spray and I blow all of the oil galleys out. Inspect all your lugs, make sure you're not, as they call, zippered. Make sure that the guts haven't spun at some point. I clean all of the galleys out. I spray the valve body out and then blow everything out with air. All right, I'm a long ways away from putting this back together, but there's a lot of inspection, clean up, things like that to do. So I do them in just, this section's gonna get done first. So silencer ring, plastic thrust. Got another snap ring here. Drive gear, Torrington bearings. Be very aware that the race is for those bearings, the position they go in. Upper race on this one, down. Take a look at this too. This bushing looks like it's almost brand new. I'm talking about inspecting. You want to make sure where items are inspected. Most kits will come with new thrust. If I had to reuse it, this is still a good thrust washer. It still has some bronze on it. The base washer is still good. On your park pawl, check all of your lugs. Check all the teeth on your planetary. Check the thrust washers on each side of each gear, make sure they're okay. Inspect all the teeth. Inspect the surface area. This is where one of the Torrington bearings rides. Same thing on this side. I know hot rod guys will TIG weld these pins in. I don't need to do that, I don't think, not run that much horsepower. On this side, make sure you check all of the teeth. On the outside of this surface, it's kind of normal to have the machining there. Same thing with these planetary gears. Make sure you don't have any excessive play. Make sure you've got the washers on each side. Same thing, a lot of hot rod guys will TIG those. Bushings, glad to see how good a shape there is, so I don't have to run these down to a local transmission shop and have them slap me in a couple of new bushings. Same thing on this. This is my sun gear shaft. We're going to make sure all of our oil galleys are good. Our surface areas. Got piston. These seals will be replaced, but you want to inspect for cracks, wear, gouges. I've got this sprag here out. I reassembled it. I do have a new sprag, so I will be installing a new one, even though that is fully reusable. Check your plates. Check all the Torrington bearings. Make sure they're all there. Make sure there's no excessive wear. Make sure there's no burn marks. I always keep track of which ones go where and which direction they face. So inner and outer races on those. As I'm inspecting, I realized that the shaft for the sug gear did not come off. This tells me something's stuck, and something sticking is not good. Could be a bushing problem. In inspecting the bushings, they again look brand new, and the holes are lined up. And then cleaned the bore out as well, but it's working. I can live with that. Once you clean and inspected, I'm going to start with this assembly. Intermediate clutch. Okay. Pair. And these are a lip seal, so you kind of have to pay attention to the direction they go. This one goes like that. I use petroleum jelly liberally. Petroleum jelly dissolves really fast and easy. Starting on the center section, the piston, lubricate it well. Now, this is a really smooth brass feeler gauge. It's really thin. And if you're careful, you can use this to chase down the lip seals. Once that's done, the spring return. And some of these can have 3 springs, some of them can have 6. And I, of course, glue everything up with Vaseline real good. Most time I put this one on by hand. Voila. All right, start putting together the rear gear train here. These are, Torrington bearings are specific directional. I use lots of petroleum jelly to make them stick together so that I can flip this stuff upside down and they stay in place. Voila. This other Torrington bearing, again, is very directional. The hatted seal coat goes up. This also gets all the bushing surfaces completely lubricated. Voila. Now remember, thrust washer goes back here. My other thing on this side is happening. Got a new sprag out. And I'm putting some petroleum jelly in it to keep the bearings in place while I go together and to lubricate it until it's running. The nylon thrust washers for my rear gear train, you can upgrade those to the brass. And since it came in this kit for the HD stuff, I will do it. So it actually goes up here. Right. And then this last Torrington bearing, the top hat comes up, then the bearing, and then the other race, the hat also goes up. And it actually rides right here. Now I've got plenty of petroleum jelly on everything. Once your down, remember your sprite will only let it turn one direction. And as I go through, you'll know if you tore a seal ring if that doesn't work. This section's ready to go. Now, time to move on to the next. Got the selective thrust washer in there. Don't know what hit this, but you can tell something hit that at one point or another. Right on the lugs. Perfect. And then, some of these have this and some of them don't, but really thin snap ring that goes down there. This one just happens to have that. Put these three pieces in the housing now just so they're out of my way and I don't miss them later. The front pump, or the pump, I wasn't going to take this apart, but I've decided to take it apart mostly because everything else, you know, when you have a broken pressure plate, there could be metal in this that is not what you want. Torque spec on these is about 20, I think. It's not that much. Be aware that long bolt, short bolt, medium bolts, there are three different sizes of bolts in there. Gears only go in one way. The notch for the drive in the converter. Now that bearing does not look like it's been done. I actually have the correct driver for this bushing. I'm just going to go over to the press because I'd rather use the press than the hammer. You see right here, there's actually bearing material missing, like it's been torn out. And then that's what a new one looks like. So, all right, you can see that new bushing looks a whole lot better. There's no pieces missing, first of all. But I kind of think that goes with what I usually do. If there's a problem with something, fix it. Way easier to do that now than later. The edge of you can still see the original machining surface, you're usually in pretty good shape. You can take some light sandpaper, emery paper, and rub it to see if you can see any scratches. If I can see the original machining on the pump, I'm really not that worried about the pump. I'm glad I took this one apart, mostly because of the bushing issue. You also want to look at the corners of all the teeth. You want to make sure that those lugs for the converter are nice and square too. I cut myself a couple of guide dowels out of 5/16 bolts, just cut the heads off of them. So if I take, I'm going to move the camera so you can see this a little easier. Okay, so it really doesn't matter if the exit holes line up with the case. What I'm doing is centering the pump. So I found this is an easy one to spot, and it's paired with this one right down here. So that will line back. Remember, these are different lengths on this back side. So the long one. The spec on these is only 20 foot-pounds. All right, again, sealing rings. Walk them around, make sure they're smooth, not sticking anywhere. Both grooves. And now I'm going to change the pressure regulator spring per the TCI instructions. Yeah, new spring substantially stiffer. So that'll bump the pressure up. Clean her out, lube her up. Petroleum jelly. Slides right in. And now I'll just put the snap ring in. Going back together with this heavier spring is not push it in with your finger and hold it while you put the snap ring in. Got the snap ring almost all the way in. This little carpenter's clamp works great. You can squeeze it down and then tighten it in until the piston's all the way in. And we are in. Double check it. Perfect. On the snap rings, remember they're directional. There's a sharp edge on your snap ring and a rounded edge. The cut edge, the non-rounded edge, goes out. That way it locks itself into that housing. Okay. Usually I'll put the seal in already, but I wanted to make sure I had everything else lined up ahead of time. Now there's two seals a short one and a long one. Make sure you put the right length one in. So seal that came out, seal that's going in. That's the tall one. Don't need it. Good Vaseline. I like Vaseline behind the seal on these. It keeps that spring in there while you're tapping it in. You don't have to worry about it coming out as easy. The clutches now, I kind of do all the stuff with the clutches last because you have to soak all of your clutches, and then we have to take apart our pistons and such. Got to go over the press to get the snap ring puller for an axle. It just happens to be the right width, and I've got a window on both sides. And some more lip seals. Again, now, just a heads up, check ball, make sure you can hear it. If you have a check ball in the drum, you don't have one in the piston, but you need one in one or the other. Make sure you soak the clutches in some transmission fluid for at least a half hour or so. All right. Lip seal, and this one goes up. Duplicate. Look down on this one. One good thing about having a pan full of transmission fluid and this time I'm chasing the lip seals down with an actual lip seal tool, which I have one of those too. Then reinstall the return springs back over to the press. There we go. All right, that's actually new thrust washer there, new thrust washer here, lubed up well. Had a bronze lower and a nylon upper. Both of my new ones are bronze. Now I'm going to go grab the steels and start putting clutches in it. All right, so my original pile of steels and clutches. This is just kind of how I do it. That way I keep track of it, steel. Clutch, clutch. Steel, steel. Clutch. All right, that one's done. I'm going to jump around a little bit on some of this process. Reason being is I went ahead and put the new clutches, new seals in the front drive. I'm going to go ahead and put the seals in the direct drive. This is our high gear stuff here. But remember, the pressure plate came out in pieces. So I've got one of those ordered. If you look at this one, this clutch is almost completely toasted, but I'll bet it's because of that pressure plate. The rest of these clutches are, yeah, they got some wear to them, so. Again, I'm glad I went through this. Again, check the gear. New sprag. All right, over to the press. All right. On the direct drive, you'll have two springs missing, just FYI, if you haven't been in one of these before. That's normal. Again, lip seal, inner, both these face down. Now I've got another one in here that faces up, but I want to read the instructions for the shift kit because I think I read this one doesn't go back in, but I'm going to go double check that before I put this back in. Okay, so this is the other modification that's deep here in this transmission. This seal is not reused. That way, this whole piston assembly moves instead of moving on two separate surfaces. Again, make sure you've got the check ball in one or the other. I've got the check ball here, so I don't have it here. Yeah, there it is. And the clutch. Double check your math there. Now, I can't do anything else with this one until I get my last set of clutches. These only come in, there's only 3 in the second gear. So what I'm going to do, since I'm actually not ready to assemble, I'm going to put the pack together. Just gonna set these nice wet lubricated clutches in my assembly line. I've got my pressure plate that came in to replace the one broken in multiple places. And with this TCI valve body and reverse manual valve body kit, they want 60 to 80 thousandths clearance. So I've also got these wire feeler gauges, and I can reasonably, I won't say I force it, but it's really tight on the 80 thousandths. This is on the outside of the TCI specifications between 60 and 80 thousandths. Okay, I've determined I'm at my maxness on my direct drive, and that's okay. I think you're better off if you're a little closer to the tighter tolerance than the looser tolerance. So how do you do that? Well, you can make this stack thicker, and one way to do that is right here. I've got thick shims, or thick steels and thin steels, and this was originally loaded with the thick ones. So when I went to the thin ones, that's how I gained that additional 20 thousandths or so, which is what the kit from TCI calls for. So if I was going to put this back together stock, I might go back to the thick steels instead of the thin ones. But what I want to do real quick is see what the difference is. So this one is 0 my gauge. How much thicker is this? This is 10 thousandths thicker. So what will that 10 thousandths do? It'll put me exactly where I want to be in splitting 60 to 80 thousandths. So that's what I want to do right now. So one thick goes back in. I think I look kind of like that. All right, let's see where we're at now. $70 thousandths. I have the dial indicator. Push in, pull out. I've got 14 thousandths. I need between 10 and 20 on this clearance on this drum, or clutch set. I'm happy with that. Remember, on the center hole for our lower gear train, we can engage our piston. Now, if I want to test my seals here, and there's my clutch. And I do both holes just to be sure. Now, that's it for the air tests I can do on that. I'm comfortable that this assembly is going to work. Now I want to see if my height or a forward clutch is going to engage that piston. Pressurizing this hole, I can see my clutch engage. So I'm comfortable, all my O-rings are good. I'm comfortable these will shift into the gears they're supposed to. Now, I've only got about 25 pounds of pressure in my compressor right now. If you have 150, put this on a regulator. Getting ready for final assembly. Still waiting on a little bit of stuff here. I made a decision. I've got the metal seal rings, which when I learned how to do automatic transmissions, especially the Turbo 350, Turbo 400, I was told, get rid of the Teflon rings, put the metal rings in. But the more research I did on this particular upgrade, I'm upping the pressure significantly and the shifting significantly. And it seems that in these performance applications, they recommend more so the Teflon rings instead. And I guess the reason for that is if these metal rings crack or break, they groove and will cause damage to the drum. Whereas these are more flexible, pliable, they shouldn't break. And if they do, and you lose a seal ring, at least you're not going to gouge the inside of the drum where that sealing surface is. So I figure worst case scenario, if these fail, I take it apart, replace seal rings. If these fail and I have to replace drums or something of that sort, then we're into some expense. And I'm going to use the Teflon on both the pump and on the center section. You got to remember to line up the bolt hole with the bolt hole. And it's right even with this notch. So Ah, much better. One tooth off. Perfect. Now this has a beveled snap ring in it. And this one's usually pretty tough. Once you're fully seated, you just take a screwdriver and lift up on the rear gear train, and then you're out. You can see I've got dial indicator on the end, and I need between 7 and 17 thousandths. Now if we move this, zero, 13. So I'm within specs on my rear end plate. I don't have to make a change to the thrust washer back there. I'm putting this together with this reverse manual shift body. The instructions are very explicit. This band will not go back in, so this is the original. So this stays out. Remember, the one piston lip seal stays out. The one sealing ring is removed. Another little area before you go together or put the pump in, I recommend pulling these fittings, cleaning them. There's also this vent bleed hole, which I usually break off, and I did this time, but it goes right here. And if you get a piece of brake line that's that size and you flare the end of it, tap it in there, they work better and they don't break. Now, I don't have a wave, so I'm not going to put one in. This gear only has 3 clutches and 3 steels. They're the larger ones. I used to think because it only had 3, it was a weaker gear, but because they're larger in circumference, it's all the same. And then pressure plate is last. Now this pressure plate only fits in one way. And sometimes they're uncooperative. And then snap ring. Remember, this is where second gear band is supposed to go. But this is another one of those pieces that the TCI kit says to leave out. So, no bands going back in. Next, I'm going to put in the direct assembly. And you kind of got to just wiggle it till it's all the way in. There it is. You can definitely feel when it's got all the clutches aligned and it drops in. Next. Is the forward drum. And this is the same thing. It has to, this gear has to find its way through all of the clutches. So a lot of times you just have to kind of wiggle it and turn it and wiggle it and turn it. And then it'll drop down every time the next clutch aligns or steel aligns. And again, you can hear it when it's dropped all the way down. And it should again turn nice and easy. Even though I'm going to have to touch this up after I lay it on its back and hook up all the valve body stuff, may as well get the rest of the body painted pretty. I've got this real flexible brake line. Grind the edge down so that it'll sit flush for the vent tube on the pump. And I'm going to kind of make a rollover tube so that if the vehicle's upside down, this is higher than the transmission and it'll keep fluid from flowing out. But when it is right side up, it'll still act as a vent in case it's overfilled or overpressurized or something of that sort. Right there, flush as can be. Comes around, dips, and I'll use a hold down where the modulator bolt is. I don't have the sealing rings or the gasket in. I have about 35 thousandths in play. That's way too much. This is the original, and then I ordered just a small kit of thicker thrust washers. And the second to the thickest one will probably work just fine, but I'm going to go to the thicker one. That way when I add the gasket, it'll be on the tighter side of the specification. Now I'm at 16 thousandths, so that's with the specifications. Now I can finish doing the install on this correctly. There are several ways this gasket can line up, so I make sure I have it correctly, and then I flip it and transfer it to the housing side, and I've got some petroleum jelly in there. Now that I've got my in specs, again I've got the sealing washers, my thrust washer, I've transferred my gasket over, and then you've got a D-ring, which is your outer seal. I lubricate this enough so it looks kind of wet. And then I install it. The nice part about these, they're lined. Well, a lot of them are lined. Everyone I've seen is lined. Make sure you go around it, make sure it is not twisted. I have new sealing washers on the mounting bolts. I put in a couple of guide studs here. See the guide studs? And now I'll just set the pump in. Push it down, make sure it's seated. And once you get everything snug, these bolts torque to 20 pounds. Like I said, you're going to gain a couple of thousandths. And I'm at 22 thousandths with the new gasket. So I'm well within specs. And next, we'll lay this down and start working on the brains of the outfit. The next piece of the Th400 and upgrade is the valve body. Valve body is basically the brains of the operation. And when I say that, it's just like a circuit board. Fluid's directed into different passages. It engages certain clutches and bands, makes the hydraulics push it forward, backwards, etc. If we were going to just do a stock rebuild, you can remove every one of these valves, clean them, make sure there's no burrs, make sure they slide nice and even, and put it back together. However, since I am not doing a stock rebuild, this is not going back in. First thing I am going to do, now I installed this bolt for the center section while it was still standing vertical. But the torque spec on it is 25 pounds, so verify that first. I'm going to show this up close. There is a hole right up there down the edge, and the TCI instructions say to tap a 1/4 inch check ball into there. So if you ever want to return this to a normal manual or an automatic shifting transmission, this is the last chance to back out. Once you hammer that ball in there, it'll probably be pretty tough to get it out. The other thing, set a bolt in the port leading to the band. That way, if you drop your check ball, you're not going to completely lose it. Ball's dropped. Next modification is removing the O-rings on the reverse accumulator piston. And I'm going to replace this O-ring. Voila. Drop the bolt down. Don't forget to take your blockade bolt out. And got a gasket. And cover. And again, these bolts, keep track of which bolts go where. Some bolts are different length. But these are also 20 pounds of torque. The next modification in the instructions is a check ball and a spring height in the valve body. I'm going to wait on that one for a minute. I'm going to go ahead and do the modulator one. Reason being, if I have to tilt this transmission over, I don't want to take the chance of losing that. So, this modulator piston should slide in nice and easy with absolutely no resistance. And then this plug and O-ring, I'm only going to hand tighten this for now. This last modification in the valve body before I actually set the valve body on is in this hole right here. And install the spring, then the check ball. So spring, check ball. And then I take a measurement. And that measurement is 1/8 or 125 below the surface. .125 is right there. Cool thing about dial indicator, okay, I have to go down a whole bunch. What they tell you to do is cut a coil off and go from there. All right, I cut one coil off. And I'm not quite there, so I'm going to trim a little bit more off. Ooh. Right on the money. I'm exactly 0.125, and it's just barely dragging on the check ball. Okay, that modification's done. By the way, just reading this, if this does not set 1/8 of an inch below the valve body, it'll lock up in second gear. So that sounds to be a fairly critical measurement. All right, I've got my little dowels in here. They're really handy to have. Set my first gasket down, and then I'm installing the separator plate, and I made a little discovery. This corner right here is just a hair interfering with the accumulator housing. In looking, there's nothing but dead surface under this right here, so I'm going to just Dremel this off real quick. That way everything fits flat. All right. I mean, that took all of a few seconds to do. And now it lays down flat. You can tell there's no corners rocking or anything on that, so happy with that result. And if you notice, this also blocks over the downshift solenoid holes. Okay, and now when you set the valve body on, you want to make sure you got your detent. Now the book calls for 20 pounds of torque on the valve body, but the TCI instructions call for 15. So I am going to go with the TCI, since this is their kit. I know some guys like to just put the aluminum FIP fittings in here. I actually prefer the brass ones. That way if I break an aluminum fitting, it'll be broken in here, not in the housing or the case. You can see I used a holder to hold the tube and my breather. Reinstall the parking pole. And make sure it works. And then torque the shift shaft seal. Again, I have a specific tool for this, but initially, be very careful sliding it over the shaft. The seal is nice and clean. There's no tears on it. It's easier to change it now than later. You can tell when it's solid. I'm not going to need this shifter once I get my other shifter, but just for testing while it's sitting on the bench. In the older cars like this one, you would have a governor, a shift modulator, a kick down, and then the manual selector. All that information tells the valve body what position to be in. Drop down to second, first shift to second shift, second to third, depending on governor speed, vacuum modulation, all of that. Once you convert to a full manual valve body, you don't need a vacuum modulator because you have to do all of this manual. You also don't need the governor. Now, the ports for this valve body still have holes for the governor, but there are check balls in there to block it off. I also verified with TCI because that's not something that's in the instructions about leaving the governor out. I thought perhaps if these tubes were open, it would need to get fluid flow back into here to lubricate that rear thrust washer, but that's not the case. You do not need to put the governor back in. You also will have no kick down cable. You gotta do everything manual. So outside of the filter, this is how this is gonna look. Now, one of my old recommendations when you put your cover on the governor so it doesn't leak, because you gotta fill the hole in. Install the governor cover backwards. And the reason you want to install that backwards is that'll tell the next mechanic that's into this transmission that we have a heavily modified transmission, and that'll tell him that without having to even pull the pan, because he'll know there's no governor in here. I've always installed 2 O-rings on my pickup tube. Before I slide the filter on, not gonna overflow anything, but I'm gonna dump some transmission fluid into the pickup tube upside down, so I know that pump's going to be well lubricated for the initial startup. Another side note, this filter is a screen, not a cotton filter, so it will be able to handle the high flow. All right. I have one more little trick for the dipstick tube before I put the pan on. And then I will be pretty much done with this transmission. Now, the next little trick I want to show you is I've got a flexible dipstick tube. Now I do put a little bit of the gasket maker on the O-rings to make them slide in. But instead of buying one of the $250 dipsticks that bolts into here, that'll keep this from coming out in an emergency type situation, put a hose clamp on an $18 one, same result. 9/16 drain plug, so next size up and we'll be ready to go. Big enough. Tighten the bolt up in here and then I'll spot weld this in. And there you go. I just ground this down enough so that it drained more of the fluid out. If I left the nut clear up here, I'd still have, ½ inch in the pan. So I'm down to about an 1/8 inch. Gasket should work good. Magnet in the pan, just in case some steels start coming apart. I really don't like using glue or silicone or anything on transmissions. I got just a trace on that dipstick tube because I know those are known areas of leakage. And then on the transmission pan, I'm just putting enough on the surface area of the case to hold the gasket in place. And I'm not just using any silicone, I'm using automatic transmission rated. That way, if it does get in contact with the fluid, it's not going to dissolve and clog stuff up. Okay, I'm almost done. Of course, got to paint stuff and drain plug now. So I actually really prefer the factory bolts. They're got the right head on them. They've got these little surface areas on them to kind of act like a lock washer. I don't get super concerned about the torque on these. It's only, I believe, about 18, 20 inch-pounds. It's not very much. I always tighten the bolt, and I just go in circles until it just starts. You can see the cork squeeze. And then I know I'm tight enough. You don't want to gorilla these down tight. All you're going to do is create a leak. All right, my next little trick for the off-road equipment here. This hole, when installing a Th400 to an LS, is not used. So if you take a little taper bit, you can run this bolt in, put a nut on the other side, and now I have something to hold on to the dipstick tube. While I'm finishing up this last little cool factor mod here, sorry for some of the background noise. It's winter, I'm running the heater, so when it cycles on and off, you get a little bit of that noise. But bring you in here and show you this here now. You can see this is flush mount. Cut a piece of aluminum so I could put a twist in it at the correct angle. I'm going to leave this on until I get the buggy together, and I may take that off. I really don't need it. We've got clearance everywhere. Almost ready. I always add a quart or so of transmission fluid to the torque converter. Don't like anything going in dry. Be kind installing the torque converter. That's probably how that bushing got messed up. I've got transmission fluid on this shaft. Make sure you don't have any burrs. And I've also got petroleum jelly on the pump seal. So there you go. It'll have like 3 clicks. It'll have about 3 clicks, and you'll be about an inch in from flush. So wiggle them around, make sure you're in all the way. Otherwise, you can bind it up and do damage when you put it in the vehicle. Okay, we have one fully rebuilt Th400 here. The big question always is will it work? Now, I think if this were a stock rebuild, no doubt in my mind, brought everything back to factory specifications, everything is put in correctly. My question is, I've never done one of these particular TCI kits for the reverse manual valve body with engine brake. There's a lot of changes I made on the inside of this transmission, and just to review that, I have removed the one lip seal in the direct drive. I have removed the second from the top sealing ring and the center support, removed the intermediate or second gear band, and we have increase the pump pressure with a new spring, and that's just on the inside. Plus, we have changed the clearance on that direct drive clutches from a maximum of 50 thousandths to a maximum of 80 thousandths, and I set that to the direct middle between 60 and 80, as if you recall. Valve body wise, of course, the new TCI valve body, the 2 sealing rings for the reverse servo piston are gone. There is no intermediate piston for the band because there is no band. The one check ball has a block off for the reverse servo, and then we have that cut and set height spring check ball, which will be our, I believe it's reversed and intermediate actuation. Additionally, there's no governor anymore. There is no kick down anymore. There's not even a solenoid. There is no vacuum modulator. There is a set distance on the block off plug for the piston in that modulator chamber. The shifter is now the only thing that controls what gear you're in. Everything is assembled, ready to go. You can see I've got the cover on, and I've got a rubber bushing in there to keep the converter from moving around while I'm moving this around. You may also be able to see I've got my little bleed tube here, and then I've got my dipstick in it. This is for another date. I do have a gasket for this. For the time at which I do the installation, I will be able to mate that to the transfer case. At this point, until I go in the vehicle, this is finished. I think we'll be in good shape. I am really happy with the outcome on this, outside of not being able to test drive it yet. Again, thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you have questions or comments, throw them down in the comment section. I answer everything I can. I am not the go-to expert on automatic transmissions. I don't do a lot of them. But the ones I do, I tend to know what I'm doing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.